can a keyboard really cheat for you?
I think it should be banned until everybody has it, or like most like keyboards have them, or whatever, or like most keyboards are updated. It's unfair. It's broken as f. It's lame.
Over the past few months, this question has torn Counter-Strike apart, all because of one poorly thought out feature. See, the Wooting 60HE keyboard took over TAC FPS esports last year because it was the fastest on the market. Plenty of other companies tried to match that speed, but nobody succeeded. So in an effort to compete with Wooting, Razer released a setting on their analog keyboards that some players believed took things too far.
This movement accuracy is 100% impossible on a normal keyboard, and in the past, this way of input handling has been determined as cheating.
I'm already starting to feel a little bit iffy on whether or not, you know, like there is this moral gray area of like how much of this is actually the player at this point.
Now the dust has settled. This controversial setting has been banned by Valve and virtually every TO in CS, but we've got to wonder, what was Razer thinking? And if you can just jam cheating software onto any keyboard you buy, what does that mean for the future of esports? Okay, folks, so before we get into the whole Razer cheating keyboard thing, just a friendly reminder to please like the video, sub to the channel, and maybe even turn on notifications. If you watch any event, then you'll see players rocking a Wooting. We made a whole video about why they're so popular last year, explaining what makes these things tick. But just to keep things simple for this video, Wooting's keyboards use magnetic Hall effect switches, which allow you to adjust the actuation points of each key down to 0.1 millimeters. That means that your keyboard responds instantly when you start pressing down a key. That, combined with the rapid trigger settings, which lets you choose when your key resets as you start taking pressure off of it, gives you faster and more precise movement, which is especially important for strafing in games like Valorant and Counter-Strike.
Wooting as a company were very innovative with the switches they released. It was the magnetic switches, the Hall effect, rapid triggers, stuff like that. When I first used that keyboard, it actually felt pretty insane to me, just because I'm personally a player that actually bottoms out their keys when I use my keyboard. Like, I press pretty hard.
Brands like Razer, High Ground, SteelSeries, Endgame Gear, and more all tried to implement their own rapid trigger features on their analog keyboards, but Wooting continued to be the fastest on the market. That was until Razer announced a new feature called SnapTap back in July. They claimed that it would give users more responsive counter-strafing in Counter-Strike, but their announcement was met with a ton of backlash from members of the CS community, including pros like Rops, who said that it shouldn't be allowed and that it basically removed human error when moving and strafing. But in order to understand why SnapTap was so controversial, we first need to understand how it works. And for that, thankfully, we have Colten.
And now, the guy who actually knows what he's talking about.
All right, I'm gonna try and not bore you too much with this and just get right to the meat. Razer's SnapTap feature prioritizes your latest input between two selected keys, but most keyboards do that. So the important piece is that it does that without you having to release the previous one. With normal keyboards and controllers, if at any point two opposing directions are detected, no movement is registered. This means that if you're pressing the A and D keys simultaneously, you won't move. But with SnapTap enabled, only the last input is prioritized, meaning you don't need to take your finger off the opposite key to start moving in the other direction. This is sometimes called Last Input Priority SOCD, or Simultaneous Opposite Cardinal Directions, referring to the various protocols an input device can use when two opposite directions are pressed at once. Theoretically, the last input method that SnapTap is using here can give you frame-perfect counter-strafes in CS2, since you don't have to worry about releasing the opposite direction key at the right moment. But there is a bit of an ethical dilemma here. Like many TAC FPS pros pointed out, nullbinds, or scripts that let you stop the game from recognizing multiple inputs at once, are banned by some tournament organizers. So it's definitely a little controversial to see Razer build nullbinds directly into their keyboards. Razer's senior esports ambassador Jimmy Malavong responded to these comments, saying that this was a real concern for them before pushing and greenlighting the feature internally, and that he made sure that TOs would allow this feature. Now, of course, with Razer's introduction of SnapTap, Wooting were not just going to sit there and do nothing, so they decided to release the long-awaited beta of their Rappy Snappy technology.
Well, Rappy Snappy is very simple. you have two keys, for example, the A key and the D key. You're comparing these two keys with each other, and whichever is the furthest press will be the key that is active. And as you move these back and forth, whichever is pressed the furthest will be the active one, and the other one will be not active.
When the Rappy Snappy beta launched, Wooting's content manager Max Jansen told us that they were against SnapTap and didn't understand how Razer didn't see the connection with cheating and nullbind scripts.
I think you have to, right? I think like if there's like a product, like just from like a business perspective, like people are gonna want to buy your product. Like, you know, if I'm looking at it as like a consumer, right, and I see one has a feature and one doesn't have a feature, obviously I'm gonna go buy the one with the feature, right?
From Wooting's perspective, that makes sense why you wouldn't put that in. But if a competitor throws that in, that becomes the industry standard. You have to keep up as a peripheral competitor, because if you don't, then everyone else is just going to use the Razer SnapTap anyways, unless it gets banned.
Even though Wooting was against the feature, they knew that if they didn't give their users the option, they'd all just leave for Razer. So they made it compatible on all their keyboards from the last 7 years. A poll indicated that most of their users wanted it. Within a day, they released a beta allowing everyone to use last input priority. They even added a few extra options. But that was only the beginning of the SOCD war. For the rest, I'll kick it back to Dimitri.
And that was the guy who actually knows what he's talking about.
The important thing to remember is that because of last input priority, counter-strafing, one of the most revered and iconic skills in all of Counter-Strike, becomes a joke. There is a reason that people like Rob said perfect counter-strafing was tantamount to cheating. Counter-strafing is very hard to master and a part of the very DNA of Counter-Strike. But for as much as it matters in CS, it's not nearly as impactful in Valorant.
The movement in CS is very different than it is in Valorant. You get punished a lot more for like letting go of your like strafe key without counter strafing, since you kind of like slide, whereas in Valorant like you kind of let go of the key and you kind of just like come to a stop. So it's a lot more punishing to not counter strafe in CS, which is why the feature is a lot better in that game compared to Valorant, because like there's a lot more room for error in CS, whereas in Valorant it's not so much.
Over the past few months, we saw plenty of CS pros using last input priority on their Wooting or SnapTap on their Razer keyboards, even though there was still a bit of a gray area.
I mean, it's overpowered for sure. I don't think it's cheating. I think it's a very huge advantage. But even if it becomes cheating, I think it should either be allowed for everyone or no one.
This actually caused rampant speculation. Which pros were using SnapTap? Is it cheating? It's the kind of speculation that can really mess with the competitive integrity of an event. Internet detectives like Reddit user Person328 and YouTuber Bird have run the numbers and pointed at a pile of top pros who had 0 or near 0 overlapping ticks while moving in their demos. Their research shows that 25 players at Blast Fall Finals allegedly used some version of last input priority.
But what's not normal is that Isaac, Rez, and Alex are all flat 0. The odds that you're going to get flat 0, no overlap are statistically significant to where we can decide that these people are using nullbinds.
Back in July, shortly after SnapTap dropped, ESEA reiterated that nullbinds are not allowed in their matches. But as many players pointed out, this set a pretty bad precedent by allowing scripts only if they're built into a player's keyboard. SOCD methods are already heavily policed in other esports. The Capcom Pro Tour, for example, banned last input priority back in 2023, and events like EVO require players to have SOCD cleaning built into their controllers, although most modern fighting games also have internal SOCD cleaning, meaning it's built into the game as well. People clamored for Valve to give the same kind of response that other devs in the space already have. And finally, back in August, after weeks of SnapTap tearing the community apart, they did. Valve added SnapTap and SOCD detection to CS2, stating that they don't want players automating inputs, and players suspected of automating multiple player actions from a single game input may be kicked from their match. A decision that Wooting seemingly agrees with. Unfortunately, this also meant that jump binds, something the Counter-Strike community has relied on for years to execute utility, would no longer be allowed. And more than that, Valve's detection system does seem to be triggering a lot of false positives.
Vamos lá, para lado, para outro, para lado, para outro, para lado, para outro. Já fui quicado por input automation.
And it gets worse. Heroic were forced to forfeit a map at Pro League shortly after the ban because admins discovered that one of their players still had SnapTap enabled.
Ladies and gentlemen, listen up. We've got an official statement coming in. The first map has been overturned as Heroic have been caught using SnapTap.
Even though things like high refresh rate monitors or lower latency mice can give you an edge in the server, this has to be the craziest thing we've ever seen in terms of pay-to-win gaming peripherals. There are, of course, ways to use nullbinds without buying a Wooting or Razer keyboard, but just remember that they're no longer allowed in CS2. Now that the dust has settled, we can breathe easy and say that July and August were pretty crazy for CS, but at least we're not dealing with full-blown legal cheats anymore. And it's kind of bonkers to think that Razer actually thought unleashing this curse on all of us was okay. So that's the end of the SnapTap and SOCD saga in CS for now. Was it cheating? Some people will tell you yes, some people will tell you maybe. Either way, it does seem like we're getting closer and closer to a reality where our peripherals are playing our games for us. And that's scary.
Thanks for watching. If you want more content like this, hit the sub button and ring the notification bell. For unique bite-sized videos you won't find anywhere else, hit us up on our X, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.